Hello and welcome to the Monster Mechanics Podcast, where we take creatures of myth and media and see how they can be improved. I am your host, Scott Paladin, and with me as always is the Fresh Prince to my Carlton Banks, Zach Jaquays. What are we talking about today, Zach?
This week we're talking about the Lich. As you know, Scott, the Lich in D&D is the ultimate magical undead.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, it is usually a practitioner of the arcane arts that has undergone some dark ritual to entomb his soul in some trinket or object called a phylactery.
As a note, that is a actual Jewish religious artifact. Like it's a real thing within the Jewish religion, and like has a meaning completely unrelated to the way that D&D co-opted it. So we may try to avoid using that word a lot because it has a meaning to a real culture.
And that's probably also why J.K. Rowling went with Horcruxes instead of phylactery, since I have to imagine that the process there was somewhat inspired by.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and like for that matter, for D&D, they would have been better off with something they could have actually like copywritten, like they can with beholders and illithids and all that stuff. Like they probably would have been better off with making up a name instead of like doing something. It would have been better for them as a business to do it less offensively.
Well, you got to imagine, like, this was Gary Gygax, back in the 70s, and he probably had no idea that this was going to be his legacy.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there.
Sure, yeah, no problem. In this case, the phylactery and the entombing the soul usually requires, the sacrifice of, an intelligent creature, and then the wizard undergoes this dark transformation to become this immortal undead creature that, if they die, they are reborn from this object that they've enchanted, and from there, forever become this powerful undead magic user.
Yes. And they're, at least in my estimation, they're one of the big three D&D monsters. Like there's the monsters that are special to Dungeons and Dragons, and it's the illithid, the beholder, and the lich to my mind.
Sure, yeah.
And I think it's a cornerstone. So much so that when we used to run the super hacked version of second edition that we ran a campaign in, that was the main villain of that campaign, was a lich.
Well, they're a great scalable magical enemy, because you could have a lich be, a mid-tier magic user who's discovered these secrets, or you can have them be like your end game, like they're just a very good base for a villain.
Yes, and the ability for them to die and be defeated and then come back because you didn't get their soul device is a really good narrative tool for sort of that schlocky dungeon crawling episodic sword and sorcery thing where like, you're going to defeat them and they're going to be back next week sort of thing.
And that's also like a great narrative element where you allow the heroes to have their victory, and then, a few episodes or a few games later, suddenly this guy can, start reappearing, and they're like, well, what? I thought we dealt with that. And then they have to start really delving into it and going, oh, okay, this guy's a real threat.
Yes.
We killed him and now he's coming after our families.
So I definitely like that sort of Faustian bargain angle for the Lich, where you have to do something particularly bad and really wreck your own soul in order to attain this great power. I'm also kind of there's two options here. One is that like doing the Lich ritual, on the one hand, it might just give you immortality, which is in itself a superpower, right? Where you're like, okay, I just have all the time in the world, so I can learn all of the things. I can prepare all of these contingencies and stuff because time no longer matters. But you could also have it where unlocking that door also grants you additional power beyond it. Like where it's one of those things where you're no longer tied to your mortal form. You get access to magics that other people wouldn't have. Like it comes with some built-in superpowers, I guess would be the way to put it. I'm not sure which one of those is more enticing at the moment. They're both interesting angles.
I do like the idea that there's something intrinsically unlocked by stepping beyond the bounds of life.
Yeah. So, and maybe that is there something with the idea that when you unlock that door, it's not just that like, the imagery of unlocking a door, I'm starting to really jive with, where like you open something up inside of yourself and other things are able to come through now. Like,
Oh yeah.
Like there's a whole Lovecraftian element there that you could do. I'm thinking about Rasputin from the first Hellboy movie, where like that's a cool imagery where he's like literally got stuff under his skin. That would be freaking sweet. But yeah, the idea that like that you, so since we're so tied into the realm of D&D with this idea, because that's kind of what liches are, and we might as well just lean into that. And is there a way to sort of call back to one of our previous ideas of them sort of being powered by one of the planes of energy? Because we originally talked about undead being powered by the negative energy plane, like it was a whole. Is there a way to sort of like extend out that mythos to additional planes? Like to say, what if you have the same thing, but with like, I don't know, I forget what the actual elemental planes are off the top of my head. I dove off of our prepared area.
There's fire, water, air, earth, negative and positive.
Yeah, but there's
those are the elemental planes, and then there's some quasi elemental planes, or like sort of the between the planes, like mud, dust. There's electricity, I think, steam.
Yeah, but there's also like afterlives and stuff. There's like
there's the outer planes, which are like the hells, the heavens, the purgatories.
I got one version of it here, which is like Celestia, Bitopia, Elysium, Beastlands, Arborea, Isgard, Limbo, Pandemonium, Abyss, Carceri, Hades, Gehenna, Baator, Archeron, Mechanus, and Arcadia.
Those are the
it's the good versus evil, lawful versus chaotic dichotomy there. But I was wondering if like there's a way you could, if you tie yourself to some sort of external factor, maybe planes isn't the right way. Maybe this is more like the concept of the warlock, where it's like there's an entity out there that you have like tied yourself to, maybe, where you're like, I mean, like imagine that you like this, you hook your soul into Cthulhu, like where like you have carved out a chunk of your own immortal soul and like shoved it into an elder god and like gotten a little bit of god inside of yourself, and that gives you access to some of that plane, that being's immense power, but also brings with it like the attention of that god and other beings like it, and like some sort of and side effects and things like that.
I love the idea that like maybe that's what the what we were calling the phylactery, or this object that they've crafted, is like this sliver of one of these outer planes, condensed into an object.
Yeah. Like or. So what you do when you create this object is that you make a physical item in your world, and you put a little bit of your soul into it and a little bit of this external creature, a sufficiently powerful creature. You put both of them in there, and by doing that, it creates a link between your mortal body and this eternal creature, and it gives you a bunch of access to a bunch of extra power.
Yeah, that's definitely a very warlock vibe, and I like that.
Yeah. But that still has big qualities of the Lich to me too, where it's like it's got the object that they're tied to, and that sort of Faustian bargain of like doing. And I really kind of like the idea that unlike the warlock, the Lich can do this without the consent of the other creature. Like he is stealing this power, or it's possible. You don't always have to do it that way. But I like the idea that like it's entirely possible to force this. You are hacking your way into the system, like.
And that just jives so well with like the arrogant archmage.
Yeah. That arrogance is a real part of the personality that I associate with the super powerful magic users.
That said, like one of the things that is most interesting to me is the idea of a Lich who regrets becoming a Lich.
Oh yeah.
Like he gets to the other side and realizes that like, okay, I've got all this power and I'm going to live forever, and oh God, I'm going to live forever.
Or that they go after the power with a particular end in mind. They say, I want to learn the secrets of the universe, and then they learn everything that they have the ability to learn. Like they fill up their library with all of the books and knowledge and everything, and then they're done, and they realize that they're not particularly interested in anything beyond what they've already learned, and they're just stuck now. And like that's a neat idea. Oh yeah, definitely. I definitely like the idea of liches getting their comeuppance, not through people like seeking them out, but just because this was actually a thing to do in the beginning. Like this was just a bad idea, really.
I also like the idea that they are perpetually haunted by whatever they sacrificed.
Okay.
Because like in D&D lore, like when you sacrifice that soul, like that person can never be resurrected again.
Yeah.
Like they are intrinsically now a part of this lich ritual.
Yeah.
But I love the idea that like they are haunted by whoever they sacrificed just till the end of time.
Yeah. Ooh. There's a really twisted version of that where the lich is like the creepy stalker crush person, like the one who like super is like into somebody and like does the ritual in order to make themselves into a lich, and it traps that person into haunting them forever and basically like in a way like keeping them prisoner around him.
Yeah.
That's dark.
Yeah. Like, I mean, like, I feel like the lich should always be very, very dark.
I mean, I'm open to the idea of something lich related that is like not quite so up, basically. Depending, because I was thinking about, you know, is there a good way to apply the idea where like you go to a good god and like, you know, arrange for the lich ritual so that you can become one of their paragons or something like that.
Well, I like the idea that maybe each of the schools of magic, like all the schools of magic's end goal is to like A, increase the user's power, and B, perhaps every one of them is like a different way of approaching immortality.
I think that maybe not all of them are, because I was thinking about specifically, if we're thinking of the lich itself as the ultimate end game of necromancy. Necromancy is often about defeating death and controlling death, but that's not what all of the other ones are about. You know, divination, for example, doesn't really care about eternal life. You know, they care about knowledge. And so, I mean, the lich version of the diviner may be somebody who is omniscient and sees and knows everything, but that doesn't grant them eternal life. Or if it does it in a very unusual way. Like, for example, it grants them omniscience of time, and therefore they have perceive all time and are therefore able to affect things in both directions. Like they're looking at the timeline from outside of the dimension of time. So like they can make, you know, reaching back into the past or forward into the future is the same for them as interacting with the present.
Yeah. Like if your understanding of the future is the same as having lived it.
Yeah.
Like your body doesn't matter anymore.
Exactly.
Like you just go live in the future for a bit, you know, live as someone else.
Yeah.
So like you just become basically untethered from time.
Yes, exactly. That would be very cool. But it's not, and I love how different an approach that is. Where like, and then that, you know, a downside for something like that is the idea that like you aren't part of the human condition anymore, and like you either lose your humanity and stop like being part of the population of people around you because you exist in an entirely different realm of existence. Like you don't relate to them anymore. They become like ants. Or
and especially if like through this divination, like you also like kind of lose your ability to interact with things.
Yes.
Like you become purely an observer.
Yes. And especially I love the idea that maybe like what happens is that you start to think of yourself as all of your decisions become predestined because they've already happened. Like you've already made all of the decisions you're ever going to make. And it sort of feels like losing your free will as well, because you can already see what you will do and all the effects you will have. That could be very cool. And like also, you know, if you manage to retain some of your ability to relate to people and are unable to interact with them in a meaningful way, that's super lonely. Like it's like that could be torturously lonely for the wrong kind of person. Okay, cool. We'll see. Like, well, okay, so we've got two down: divination and necromancy.
Sure. Yeah.
What would the lich evoker look like?
Oh God, like I'm picturing like they've kind of discovered like a way to convert anything to like any kind of energy.
Okay.
Like, and like maybe there's like the conjuration side is sort of like creating matter from nothing.
Yeah.
If the energy side is just converting everything to energy, like I feel like they're almost like this destructive, like disintegrating sphere of like just converting everything around them constantly into energy.
That's cool. I'm not sure why it would be enticing though.
Yeah.
What I'm thinking is maybe they, because the big thing is like the reason why you become an evoker, at least to my bias, is that evokers want to blow crap up. That's their whole point in existing. Like they want to have the biggest fireball. They want to have they want to be the big damage dealer. And so it seems like what they should be granted by going through this process is the ability to, like, they need to be the avatar, right? Like they need to have the ability to like make massive changes across a great distance and a great, huge, they need to be able to sink continents and like cause, firestorms that will, wipe out into halves of a civilization and stuff.
I feel like they're like the natural evolution of like a city's like war wizards.
Yeah. Well, what I'm thinking is to me, sounds like the downside of that is that you are constantly in danger of burning up. Like they have the same tank as everybody else of life force, and that they've just taken the limiter off and are starting to use more and more of it all of the time. And that it will eventually, and they're also like channeling huge amounts of energy through themselves. And like that just wears away at you basically until the point where they like cease to exist. And it's sort of, I like the idea of them burning up and blowing up, like the ultimate end of the evoker lich is to just become a hydrogen bomb, like.
Yeah, I could see that. I feel like, just kind of like that perpetual pursuit of basically splitting the atom, as it were.
Yeah, that could be cool. And then, so for those, you'd have to make some sort of deal with an entity. If we're going back to that idea that is like raw power, maybe maybe it's not even an entity then. Maybe that's when you go into one of the elemental planes and like pull a bit of it into yourself. And you're not even interacting with another creature. You're interacting with an entire, elemental plane or something like that.
Like maybe like the idea is like they become like basically a living conduit for these planes.
Yes, which grants them access to all of that power, but is itself incredibly dangerous to them and to the world around them because, huge fireballs basically.
Yeah.
I kind of like that idea too, because it implies that they become more specialized as they become a Lich evoker. Like they're going to be like, okay, I am the fireball guy. No, I am the water, and except that, just on a hugely massive scale, like you get the ability to like cause volcanoes to erupt and stuff like that. And summon, to raise all of the water from the world's water table to cause a flood that would, drown the entire world and stuff like that. I love them as like, maybe they don't happen that super often because when they do, like it resets the world. Like that's the world, that's the cycle of world ending catastrophes that keeps like keeps people from developing past like a Middle Ages sword and sorcery level of technology, because eventually they get to the point where they can make a Lich evoker and they blow everything up.
They keep accidentally introducing extinction level events.
Yeah, exactly. That's good. Okay, so what else do we got? If we're going to go through all these lists, conjuration.
So conjuration is kind of an interesting one. Because like it's both the creation of matter, but it's also like pulling other creatures from other planes. Yes.
So I always got the impression that even the things that they created came from somewhere. If you make a if you're making an object, I forgot, for some reason the only thing I can think of is good berry, where you're like, I'm going to make some delicious berries. Like I always assumed that he was pulling those berries from some plane, that he was he was reaching into the Feywild or something and grabbing the berries out of there, or possibly pulling them from the Platonic idea, where there's the idea of Platonic forms, where every creature, every object is some perverted, imperfect version of the original, perfect version of that, and that those objects must exist in some space, and that he is maybe getting a new version of those. Wonder what if the conjuration thing is not about raw power, but about control and being able to conjure things that don't exist, or to remix them. I'm thinking sort of like the monsters from Annihilation, where or just the concept of the shimmer from Annihilation entirely, where he's by unlocking the ability to sort of live remix creatures and objects and stuff and morph them together and control their properties.
That feels a bit more like the transmutation school to me.
Okay,
which is all about altering things.
Well, I was thinking, but I mean, like the idea is that instead of pulling in a hobgoblin or something, you pull both a hobgoblin and a air elemental, and you get an air elemental hobgoblin summoning, rather than like changing something that already exists. But maybe that's better for transmutation or alteration or whatever.
Another interesting aspect of conjuration is its focus on teleportation.
Okay.
Which again ties in with like that kind of pulling things from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I like the idea that like transportation or, like tying points in space together is what conjuration kind of focuses on. So like a master or a lich conjurer might be the kind of person who is just like unbound from the concepts of distance and can just be anywhere he wants at any time. Yeah.
I was also thinking, isn't conjuration the one that allows you to create like pocket dimensions and stuff?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. 8th level demiplane is an 8th level conjuration spell. Okay, so the ability to like warp and create space is also seems to be tied up in there. So maybe like being able to create your own. Oh, okay, that's what it is. They turn inward and they start creating their own universe within themselves.
Okay.
Like that's their down. Like that's their, like if you keep going down that thing, like you're going to become a stronger and stronger conjurer, able to pull things in from other universes and warp and create space until it starts to like spiral fractally inward. And you create your, it starts off with you creating a demiplane, and then you create a demiplane inside your demiplane, and then you like expand the size of both of them, and then like eventually you are just the original creator god of a smaller universe within the universe. Like, and that
I like that.
Yeah, you go full Matrix and like take over, and like you basically disappear from your prime material plane because you're spending all of your time in this other thing that you're creating, and then like that spirals out of control, and then you've got this whole other world,
and it's just turtles all the way down.
Yeah. It's lich duration all the way down.
Yeah, I like that. That kind of that nesting egg.
Yeah. And maybe sometimes that like, because if we're looking about how that would manifest in your story, you could think about maybe like whole lost civilizations could be explained. Why they're lost is because a conjurer like got overly, maybe they had a sorcerer king who was a conjurer and like locked them all away inside of a smaller plane where they've been living this whole time. And that would explain like, why they might have disappeared, or what might have happened to these mysteries, or like whole continents could disappear, or like, or reappear, like because of disruptions done by people who have this kind of power.
Or surprise, you've all been living in a conjured universe this whole time, and now you've managed to escape, and now here's my whole new world for because I got bored of our last campaign. So,
yeah, that's very in character for some DMs that I know. Okay, so what else have we got here?
There's abjuration, which is kind of an interesting.
Yeah, I never really understood what was the difference between abjuration and like.
So abjuration is basically like, it's kind of like all the schools of like protection magic.
Okay.
Where it's warding things, it's preventing things, dispelling things.
I don't have feel like I have enough of a handle on what's at the root of that to say what.
So I feel like the abjuration lich is basically like the response to the other 7 kinds of.
Oh, it's like a lich that specializes in dealing with the other liches. Yeah, that could be.
Like where his is basically like, like unraveling and like destroying magic even.
Yeah. So like in that case, maybe that's for some reason that seems very order focused for me. Like, like if an evoker is very chaotic because they love to destroy things, the abjurer would be very, very order and law focused in terms of like putting things right and preventing destruction. So that's good. So maybe they're sort of tying themselves to, either a plane or a god for whom that is their main philosophical focus. And so that grants them the ability to like set things in order and like prevent destruction.
I could also see them like becoming like basically like a living, customized anti-magic sphere.
Yeah.
Like where they just can selectively disrupt or prevent magic.
Yeah, or even maybe like it's an anti-entropic field. Like it's a field in which like things don't break down quite so much, and like destruction is prevented, and like maybe even like creatures that are dying, if they fall into the orbit around this person, like their wounds, they don't get better necessarily, but they also don't get worse. And so you end up with this like like, you know, sort of like a time stop, you know, like where like they're preventing things from getting worse, or maybe maybe if they apply their focus, they can also mend them or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, anti-magic field, preventing damage. I like that sort of philosophy. Yeah, sort of, they're tied more by philosophy than effect, you know? That's kind of an interesting angle on it.
So there's transmutation, enchantment, and illusion left.
I hate illusion. It seems like always, to me, it always seemed like they put it in there because it's a trope that shows up with magicians. But as a D&D player, I was always like, why would you ever choose this? Why can't you, like, why not choose things to actually do the things instead of make things appear?
Yeah, I think that kind of boils down to like how your DM like responds. Like if the end goal is killing your enemies, like if you only ever get experience for killing monsters, then illusion's like, okay, well, why go that route? But if you got a DM who's focused on more like resolving a plot, then illusion becomes incredibly useful, and it's just kind of like you can make up whatever you want to happen.
So this is, and at least for game design reasons, illusion always was a problem for me, because if your GM if they're not like on the ball about like doing, you know, disbelief checks and things like that, or if they just right out say, oh, they know it's an illusion, they don't care, they can completely override all of the effects of illusion.
Yeah, illusion definitely falls victim to the DM fiat kind of.
Or if they're willing to roll with it, a creative player completely blows all balance out of the way, because they can mimic things that would be much more powerful than themselves, which allows them to get the effects and benefit of those very powerful things. So for example, if you create the illusion of a Tarask, you can, if you convince an entire army, the entire army disperses. Well, like that's that's a second level spell or something like that. If you're depending on what exact system you're using, it's like you can either like they're a narrative and gameplay element where it's like either they're going to overrule everything else because they have good solutions to it all, or your GM is going to say, no, I don't like you doing that. We're not going to allow that. I'm going to come up with ways to circumvent you, at which point you've like chosen a specialty that now is being rendered irrelevant.
Yeah, I can definitely see that being the issue. And that does kind of fall on the player to be respectful of the game, I guess.
Yeah. It's one of those things where the only way it really works is if you've built a system and or a relationship between yourself and the other players where you are collaborating on the story, as opposed to the sort of oppositional style that you see in lots of D&D and stuff like that, where like it's treated a bit more like a war game, because that's what it was designed as. D&D was originally a war game. So like it's got all those elements and sort of cultural holdovers from being a war game. But like illusion as a concept doesn't work in that world. Like it you know, because it needs to be, for it to work well, it needs to be collaborative, where you're like, I have a proposition for the way this could go. Here's an idea. And if everybody at the table likes that, that's what'll happen. And if not, well, maybe I won't do that and we'll do something else, you know, like that. Otherwise it's like contentious. Anyway, we have spent several minutes talking about game design in the middle of our I guess we're kind of a game design podcast, but not that much. Okay, well, in that case, let's put off illusion. We'll come back. We'll circle back to that one.
Sure. Well, we've got transmutation and enchantment to discuss.
So transmutation is the ability to turn things into other things, and enchantment is the ability to like imbue magical energy into other objects, but not to actually change their form, I guess. Like
enchantment is often focused on beguiling, particularly.
Not enchantment in the terms of this is an enchanted item, but more like you have become enchanted with this person. Oh yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Mind affecting magic. Yeah. Oof. That one can lead into all kinds of bad places depending how you apply it, of course. I do like the idea that like that's it. Like everybody thinks the necromantic liches are the evil ones, but like no, actually it's the enchantment liches that you really want to avoid. That's actually kind of cool. That like it gives them more and more ability to control the minds of those around them. To maybe even to the point where they do it unconsciously, where like the
propagandamancer.
But like the idea that like eventually like they're so good at this ability to change the mind of people around them that like people become like different around them without them trying, and like like they're literally able to like change everyone around them's perception of the world so that it sort of bends to their will, you know. Kind of like they start to feel like the protagonist in a video game where like everybody's like responding to you and cares only about you.
Like I love the idea of like the wizard who like accidentally becomes president of this nation because of like this strong just unconscious magic.
Yeah. And like even to the point where like if they like, for example, if they were an optimistic enchanter and they would say, oh well, people are basically good and nice, and they like go into it and you know they are sufficiently powerful, people start to become good and nice around them. And like, because you walk into this guy's person and his idea of what people are overrides your own brain, and you become his version of what you would be, is very dark. Which I think makes an interesting villain.
There's sort of a little less accidental in that. But there's one of my favorite books from so long ago was Villains by Necessity.
Okay.
About a world full of basically good had finally triumphed, and they had stamped out all evil monsters and developed a school of magic that could basically erase people's evil desires.
Okay.
Which they called whitewashing.
Okay.
But like the book itself focused around like basically the world's last villains as they attempted to prevent the world from sublimating into a ball of light.
Yeah.
As the good guys relentlessly pursued these villains. Great book.
Yeah. I could see that being sort of along the same lines. So like, okay, what creature, what entity do you tie yourself to in order to get the enchantment magic? Like, Is it literally just like, you know, Queen of the Elves, basically? Like, is it somebody who's highly specialized in that way? Or is it a giant mind worm that like overwrite? Like, is it the Borg where like you overwrite people's minds like with your own?
I could see something like that. Yeah, that'd be definitely kind of a dark power to pull from.
And I mean, like we could absolutely make okay. So what if like, that's the high level enchanter version. What if there's a version of the enchanter who becomes disconnected from their own mortal form and becomes pure thought, able to sort of jump from brain to brain, or live amongst many? They could become a hive mind, because of course we're gonna have to get one hive mind per episode. That's our allotment. So like they get so lost into the world of thought and other people's brains that they sort of start to be able to like inhabit them and like, it's like offload some of your thinking into somebody else's brain is such a great phrase. that could be cool. I do like the idea that if you are sufficiently powerful at like controlling other people's brains, you can just be like, do some math for me real quick and get the answer back telepathically really quickly.
So end goal for the enchanter is to become a computer.
Yeah. I mean, like a super powerful AI, basically. Yeah, become the Borg.
A server farm.
That's cool. Okay. But yeah, I do like the idea that there's some entity out there that like and maybe that's how that entity was formed, is like it now grants, maybe it's not even like, it's quite willing to grant you enchanter lichdom powers because eventually you are going to grow into it. Like you're going to become part of itself. As you become more and more powerful, and you're going to bring in your entire world.
What was that? Was it NASA at Home or something? Like where you basically
Oh yeah,
like lent a portion of your processing power to NASA. To
it was actually SETI
at home.
Yeah, where they would send you out chunks of data to be computed.
Like I picture like the entities like basically something like NASA, where they're just like, okay, yeah, you have this power or whatever, go enslave your masses. And meanwhile, like you do that, and I'll use a portion of your server farm to, continue my search for extraterrestrial intelligence.
Or just like that's what powers the brain that is this thing, is that it's running its computing power on the brains on the wetware of many worlds that have been overtaken by enchanter liches. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay. That leaves us with transmutation.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's the prefix there, but immediately I'm thinking about transhumanism, about like the ability to change the human form. Because like right there in the high level list of for transmutation is polymorph, the ability to like change the actual. So that seems like an angle on which they would be headed. They'd be like the ability to modify people and themselves in a bunch of interesting and cool ways.
Like the thought experiment, like if you were to design a human, how would you do it?
Yeah.
And they're just like, well, I'm going to do that.
So like we're looking at like a very high level, like biohacker, like their ability to take things. Maybe it is the full on, Victor Frankenstein, the ability to create life within things, like to change. Cause I think at least some of their spells will like stone to flesh, right? Where like you can take a non-biological item and make it into something living, which is, I love that somebody created that thing specifically as a reversal of turning somebody to stone. Like, okay, we're going to make a spell that does, and then immediately like 2 minutes later, somebody else was like, well, what if you use that on regular stone? And it just makes like a big old hunk
of
flesh. That's no good. Which I love. I'm like, that is the guy I would have been in that conversation.
Yeah, and like my question would be like, what kind of flesh is it? Is it human flesh, like specifically, or do we like? Is it just like a 10 by 10 cubic foot of dwarf?
I like the idea that I mean, just to go off on a tangent about stone to flesh. So the original, like the version of it, the thing that you would always expect it to do is you take a statue of somebody and it turns them into that person back, right? So what if it is based on the form of the thing? So like it creates flesh of whatever is like closest to the shape of the thing that you're turning into, or that like whatever that stone object is. So like if you make a giant statue of a dude, like if you went up to Michelangelo's David and cast stone to flesh on it, it would make a 20-foot tall dude with a tiny little dick. And so like similarly, if you have like a stone tree, like stone to flesh, I would actually make a tree. So maybe it's something along the lines of like, but the thing is, if you create an object which is just like not biologically formed, like a slab, you would create a monolith of like a 20 foot by 20 foot by 20 foot stone block. What's it going to make? And it, like you have to imagine the DM like rustling through a Rolodex of monsters, being like, I guess it's going to be a very malformed. Well, I guess in the cube form, he's going to make a Drellis cube. Sorry. But if it's like, you've done a door. Okay. I guess that means it's going to be a cloaker. Like it just kind of like randomly riffles through and like finds the thing closest to it, which is actually,
I love the idea of like, that's how like some wizards are like hunting for extraterrestrial life or something, or trying to find like elder gods or something by like they have a sculptor with them, like who just, sculpts odd shapes or whatever. And he's like, well, what about this?
I do love the idea of blindly making shapes and then just trying. That's really funny, actually. I like that a lot. It's also a really good origin for some of the weirder monsters in D&D, where it's like,
because it's always a wizard made it.
Yeah,
they never like go into how.
And it was literally like he was just around with a stone to flesh spell. I like that. Yeah. Okay, so we've been off topic for a couple of minutes. Let's circle back around.
Right.
The transmuter has the ability to change the properties of things. Specifically, it seems like a lot of it is like the ability to change their own or other living creatures' properties.
Like there's other things like I think haste and slow fall under that. So there's potentially like the manipulation of time that kind of falls into there.
Ooh, haste and slow to me also sounds like straight up superpowers. Like these guys, this feels a little bit like Marvel or DC, where like they're going to be like creating superheroes and supervillains. Maybe the ability, maybe the thing that gets unlocked when you like tie yourself to whatever transmutation god will make you into a transmuter lich is the ability to make permanent transmutations. Like that's the really high level stuff. So it's like when you cast haste, you don't just make them hasted for 30 seconds or whatever haste lasts. It's like, no, they're just fast now. They're the Flash, and like they're stuck that way unless you undo it. And so like they can make like radically drastic changes to things. And sometimes, you know, there's absolutely the ability for something like that to be used for good, you know, like going in and being like, you know, healing the sick or people that have disabilities or deformities or something like that that they want to change. Come to a transmuter lich and he's like, okay, there you go. You know, bam, you know, you have, or for that matter, you're like, I want to be a centaur. And he's like, hell yeah. Okay. You're a centaur now.
I love the idea that they're basically like sort of able to like rewrite the laws of the universe, like in wherever they are at, and it be permanent. Yeah.
Yeah. The ability to like affect permanent change on the world would leave behind some really weird ass shit, right? Like
I feel like wizards, like the like these transmuter liches are the reason for like wild magic zones.
Yeah. And yeah. So what's their final end? Like what's the monkey's paw version of how these guys meet their end, like the other ones?
Oh gosh. So
is it that they lose all concept of like reality? Like they start to like, they forget what the original versions of things were and like start breaking stuff down?
Like, I feel like they just eventually like, they don't necessarily like kill themselves off, but they like transmute themselves into something that we can no longer identify as living. Yeah. So they sort of transcend, or
yeah. They sort of sublime. They're like, I'm gone. You know, I'm in a higher. I have gone pure. I'm a being of pure light and hope now, and it's very nice. And I no longer like transmuting themselves into something that they no longer care about anything relevant anymore. Like they're just like, I'm
like they transmute themselves into something that doesn't care about transmutation anymore.
Yeah. Or they're like, did you watch Love, Death, and Robots?
I have not.
Okay. So there's a particular, I guess this is a spoiler for one episode of Love, Death, and Robots.
Sure, yeah.
There's it deals with a famous painter and sculptor who's like the universe's best artist. And over the course of like the episode, they reveals that he originally started off as a pool cleaning robot. Okay. That like his entire life, all of his artistic work has been based around the color of the tiles in the pool that he used to clean back when he was a pool cleaning robot. And then his final work is that he recreated the pool, and then he jumps in, dumps off all of the additional parts that have been added onto him over the year, and goes back to just being the pool cleaning robot. And I'm like, yeah, that seems like a transmutation. That is a big transmuter mood to me, where he's like, okay, you know what? I want to be happy. I am going to become a creature that is happy, and then like no longer cares about being sentient anymore.
Love that.
Okay. And then we have to circle back around to illusion.
Back to illusion, which like, I think if you're not approaching this so much from a game thing, there's a lot that can be done with the illusion magic.
Yeah. And it really comes down to a question of what illusion means, because if illusion is like manipulation of light and sound, then maybe it's something along the lines of like making that light and sound like real, like making it material. Or if illusion is instead the ability to affect the perception of people around you, like it's about warp, like when you make an illusory bird example, is it that you create the photons that are then transmitted into the eyes of people around you, or manipulate the photons in the world around you to create the vision of a bird? Or is it that you affect the brain of everybody in the vicinity who's in observation range of the bird to say there is a bird here? Because which one you're doing, I think, wildly affects what it means to make an illusion, right?
Yeah, it's kind of the difference between, having like projecting a bird onto a screen versus having everyone wearing VR head goggles.
Yeah.
And looking at this space and like, oh, there's a bird there.
Yeah. I don't have a good answer to that. They're both interesting.
I like that like it's altering the perceptions, because that I guess that it impinges more on the enchantment side of things.
Yeah, I think
instead of the conjuration side of things.
I think under normal circumstances for game design reasons, I think that's what I would go for, is to say that you're changing the perception of people around you rather than making the light. But that for the purposes of the conversation we're currently in, if we did that, that's very much like what we were talking about for enchanters already. So maybe we want to go in a different direction.
And the other thing is like there's things like lasting illusions, like where like they'll cast an illusion on an area and that will just persist for however long. And if someone comes along and the wizard's not there, like what do they even see? Yeah.
Good point. So, okay. So in this world, illusionists are creating the perceived effects, the actual, whatever it is that causes those effects. So for example, if they're making an illusory wall, they will make the light reflect off of that surface as though it was a wall, and if they're making an illusory sound, they're creating the vibrations in the air. If it's possible that they can create illusory smells, then they're going to actually be creating the particulate matter that's picked up by the olfactory senses, things like that.
One of the interesting things to me was always that, like, at least in the older versions of D&D, like an illusion could affect you and harm you, and as long as you believed it was real.
That strikes me very similar to the Pratchett idea of like the story and belief being the most important thing. Gets very meta. Oh, dude. Illusionists are super meta, right? That's the idea.
Okay.
All right. So if that's true, if the thing about like you believing it makes it like able to affect you, I think the cause of that being true in this universe is that this is a fictional universe, and therefore belief in that universe is what creates it and gives it power. So even within the rules of the universe itself, things that have belief in them are treated as real, right? In a certain sense, the reason why this fictional universe works is because the people perceiving it, the reader, the audience, and the author all perceive it as quote unquote real, with the idea of suspension of disbelief. And so the illusionist always searching for the better version of the illusion, and like the way to make more people in the world around him believe his illusion so they are more powerful. That illusionist eventually gets in contact with the author, finds out that they're inside of a fictional universe, and that's like the Lichdom version of illusionist, right?
Okay, I love that. Yeah.
Is that like, oh crap, I am just a made up character inside of a RPG, or and so what they get access to is not necessarily like more important illusions. They just get access to all of like genre information. They get access to the words on the page they're written on, basically.
That's amazing.
Okay, so that's a version of illusion I like. All right. Well, that was, I guess, that's all we're covering for liches, because we've had our time just about.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of started with liches and went a little far afield, but
that's fine.
Kind of looking at the end goal for each of the different classes or the different schools of magic, which I think is
that's an
interesting look at things.
Yeah, that's a good expansion on the idea, because liches always did seem very necromantic focused. And so now you've got all the other versions of it, including some particularly weird ones. Well, on that case, bye.
All right. Until next time.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Monster Mechanics. Monster Mechanics is produced and edited by me, Scott Paladin, and hosted by myself and my best friend, Zach Jaquays. All of the ideas generated during this podcast are released under a do what the f you want public license.